Well, hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to the build of the BVM Super Bandit. This is video number 2 in the assembly series. We're making good progress. Let's dive back into this amazing, fast, crazy, overpowered sports jet. All right, last video we finished off with kind of getting our axles done up here for our wheels. So we're gonna wrap these guys up and then we have to start getting this mounted on the landing gear. Other thing we need to do is do a little bit of cleanup and servicing on the actual gear itself. We've got a little bit of dust and stuff on it. We want to make sure we clean that stuff up before we put these back together. So we've got our front done here already on the nose gear. That's straightforward. On the mains, we've got our little channel that prevents the axle or wheel assembly from moving on the leg, and we also have our little clamps there for our door that we need to deal with as well. So lots to do on these guys, so let's get the rest of these main wheels assembled. So we got our axles done on our wheels. Those turned out awesome. Yes, we are going to paint these guys black as well, so don't worry about that. We also got all of our gear serviced, so I cleaned up the gear, re-lubricated everything, and so that is all good to go. Also ran it through the tester, the electron tester, and just cycled them. Now, one important thing to note is this is not, and this is covered in the instructions, this is not a standard setup. So they flipped the positive and the signal around, and it's following the normal setup that electron would use. So positive on the outside, negative on the outside, nothing, or in this case, signal in the center. So that's an important thing when you're routing the wires. Pay attention to that. So now we've got one of our wings out here, and I'm going to get the gear fit. Now, part of getting the gear fit is doing the toe in, but also getting our doors mounted as well. We need to get our doors, basically these guys, fit in place so we know exactly where they are, where to fasten them, and everything. So that's an important step. We may end up taking the doors or the gear back out once we've got the gear fit, but that is step number 1. Yeah, we will end up taking it out because we have our doors to deal with our servo here and things like that. So that's something to be aware of. So we've got one of the gear legs installed here on the left side. We've got the gear remounted. Now the point of doing this is to get our toe in and everything set. So our toe in on our wheels needs to be set first. Then we can set our doors up, and then we're able to pull these gear out as one solid unit, and we can do everything else afterwards. But the importance of that is so everything's set up properly. Now the root of these wings is parallel with the center line of the aircraft, so when we do our toe in, we can use our wing root as our reference point to add a couple degrees of toe in. So with the gear loosely installed, we're going to take our electron manual unit here. We'll extend these guys. Okay, so with that extended, now we can use a straight edge and get that set up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure from the root of the wing, and we're going to measure in, probably going to check this former right here first. If this former is parallel to the root of the wing, which it probably is, then we'll just end up using this guy as our reference point, but we'll see. So if I measure from the inside edge, I'm at 144 millimeters. And on the back side here, we're 142 millimeters. So this former is a little bit off, so we're not going to use that. We're actually going to measure in from the root of the wing. Now I can still use this as my rough reference point, but what I'm going to do is just figure out my difference here. So if I measure this guy, we're at 144, and this guy, we're at 142. So this line is actually adding toe out like that. So what I want to do is I want to make my tape line come in just a little bit. So we'll take a piece of tape. Using that former as a reference point, I'm just going to eyeball it like that. And let's measure a little bit further here. So we're at 145, and we're at 143. So that's not quite enough. So we'll adjust our tape line a little bit. Like that. And we are at 144. 144. So now this tape line is parallel with the root of the wing. So now I'm going to take a long carbon rod. We're going to hold it against the wheel, and this will tell us how we're sitting. So I'm also looking at this backwards. So right now I'm facing the rear of the wing. So we got to be aware of that stuff. If I hold it on the face of the wheel, now I can take this and I can add just a little bit of toe in. So when I look down that line, if the front edge of my carbon rod is touching the edge of the tape, I've got about 3 millimeters back here, which is perfection. So what I'll do is I'm going to snug this guy down just slightly, just so we can get this stuff checked. And if it all works out, we'll loosen it off and use some Loctite on it. But this is a pretty serious pinch there, so we should be fine. Now I'm going to recheck this, and we still have the same amount, so a couple millimeters of space back there. We can pull our tape off, and then now we can retract that landing gear, and we can make sure it's not going to interfere with anything here. Everything's going to work good. Perfect. So our wheel spins freely. Our tire spins freely in there, and everything looks good. So let's deploy this. We're going to loosen this guy off. Add a little bit of Loctite to this. Now I don't have to worry about the leg moving while I'm doing this, because it's a pretty snug fit in there. Like there is some resistance in the trunnion and the leg, so I'm not having to worry about that. So we're just going to put a couple drops of Loctite on this pinch bolt. So just a little bit. Now you do have to be careful with this pinch bolt. So if you back this pinch bolt out too much and then you try and use the landing gear, what can happen is it's going to get caught on the frame right there, which is definitely bad. Snug that down a good amount. There we go. Just do a quick double check. We know that that former is quite far off, so yes, I've got lots of space there. That looks good. And now we'll retract that again and just confirm that we're happy. Perfect. So now what we can do is we can take our door and start to get that installed on the leg. All right, so we've got the door and everything all fit. Had to do a little bit of sanding. Can't put this together right now, but had to do a little bit of sanding on this back section because when this opens, it was interfering. So we got that all dealt with, and this is ready to go. So we've got our gear unbolted. So what we'll do now is we'll pull this guy out, and that allows us to get this set in place. Don't think we really need to get that set in place, but we need to paint it black. So what I might do is just put one drop of CA to just kind of hold that in the right spot. And then what we'll do is we're going to pull these doors off, and we're going to get these doors painted, and that's going to finish off the interior side of the doors. So with gear set aside, we're moving on to our aileron surfaces. We're going to work from the outside of the wing inwards. We've got this one put in place. So this one's got its hinge pin installed. That is all awesome. And what we're using for hardware on these guys is the Jet products. Let me look at the package. MP Jet clevises. So we're going to use kind of a combination on these guys, but we're using the double-sided arms and the MP Jet's clevises. Now these are pretty slick setup. I like them as well because you've got one side that is regular threads, the other side which is backwards threads, so adjusting these is really simple. And you can also buy these clevises in left-handed threads or right-handed threads, so very handy to be able to have this setup. The control rod's also nice and strong as well. So this is basically the setup that we're using. Like this, we've got our servo arm set up as well, and the Model Aviation and the clevises here, whatever they're called, fit perfectly on most aluminum servo arms as well. So great setup. So we're gonna get both of our ailerons set up, and once the aileron's set up, then we kind of have to move into the gear area. Now the gear area gets a little bit complicated because we have our door servo to put in. Now this original piece here is the air cylinder mount, which we're not using anymore, so we have to make a mount for our door servo. That's not a problem because we have this wood that we can work it into. So we'll work on that, and our flap servo gets mounted in this area right here. Now, one of the challenges running into with the aileron setup is the stock spacing here between these two openings that the maple blocks fit into, like this. This is designed for an old 8411 JR servo. Now our MKS servos are substantially bigger than those old 8411s, so we're going to have to do a little bit of modification there, which is actually totally fine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get my servo mounted to our blocks using the carbon L bracket. So there's a bit of manipulation and stuff needed to do this. Then we're actually just going to sand out our plate that was glued originally by us in this area. So we're going to extend it a little bit, make it a little bit wider using the Dremel, and that's going to give us a better servo position anyways, and we can adjust that servo this way to work with the slot. Okay, so we basically have our servo installed, our blocks are installed, spot glued in place. Now what we do is we take these servos out and we add some joiner pieces. Now those joiner pieces go in between our wood blocks and the formers that are in this aileron opening. So what that does is that spreads the load out from the servo onto the wing spar and everything, and that just makes sure it's a nice solid pocket. The other thing we're going to do is we're probably going to add a spot of high sol in between the servo and the wing skin, and what that does is that solidifies the joint between the servo and the wing, and then if you ever need to get that out, you just take some a hot soldering iron and melt the high sol. So another little trick to do. So we're going to get that done on this side. So I'm going to pull the servo out, and we need to match the other wing doing exactly the same thing. Now if we get this cover sort of installed, you can see there we are basically centered on that servo arm, which is perfect. All right, so we've got our servo all installed with this hardware. This hardware is insane how accurate it is and stiff it is. So zero play in this entire system. This left wing is a little bit tight, a little bit creaky on the aileron. The other wing's a little bit better, but should be fine. And we've got our high sol blocks glued in there, our balsa blocks on both sides, so that will be very strong. And I didn't hook any of this up to the extension yet because I wanted to plug it into the receiver so we can get everything kind of set up and sorted. Okay, so with this side all done, we've got our linkage sized up and ready to go, and we are shrink tubing our connection here. So because of there's quite a lack of room in this area, what I'm going to do is I'm going to shrink tube the connector, and then we're just going to tuck this wire into the space. Ow, that's hot. Right in this part of the wing right here. Basically there's very little extra room, so I can't really wind anything up in there. So we're just going to take the servo lead and tuck it into this pocket right here. And we don't want to use the actual servo wire as an extension, and the reason for that is if we ever have to change the servo, we want to be able to get at the servo itself and be able to change this connector. So that's why we're doing it this way. So we've got the servo lead all tucked in nicely, and that is awesome. So we haven't done up the other side of the connector because we need to get our cover plate installed, but we do have our wire run here, and that's an excess amount of wire coming to the root of the wing. We're going to have all of our connectors right in this location right here. So if you look at the wing layout, this is right behind the forward spar is where our connector is going to be, and that's going to work out to be this area right here. Now I am not going to cut these lightning holes out if we don't need to. I mean, this is not going to save much weight on the aircraft, and I'd rather leave these in place than taking them out if there's no reason to take them out. So I think at the very least we're going to cut these guys open right there. All right, so we're ready to button this servo up, the aileron cover. I trimmed off the paint off of our mounting tabs, added a glob of Hysol on the leading edge of the servo. So now the servo is absolutely rock solid in there, and we're ready to put our cover plate back on. All right, so cover plates are back on. I added the screws back in, obviously colored them as well too. Now I don't think I'm happy with this setup. My tape there is just saying I need to adjust it for length. The reason I'm not happy with this setup is up travel, we can get a ton of up travel, which is fine. Other way, we can get a reasonable amount of travel. So the owner wants this to be 13 millimeters, and that is 11. So we're close. The downside is any more than that, what happens is it starts to bend the rod. Now I like this setup because this is kind of hidden in the cover. I don't like this setup because it limits that travel in that direction. So I'm going to give this some thought, and we may change this up a little bit. I'm going to continue on with the wings and just think about this. Now, what would we do as an alternative? Well, we could go to a standard rod. The problem is the standard rod really isn't that strong, so we want to have an outer sheeting on it. Now the outer sheeting, if we were to add a piece of carbon, it's actually going to be the same thickness as this rod. So cancel that part. Now if we went with a threaded rod and put a piece of metal over top, that's a solution. It's going to save us 1 millimeter overall, but the downside is when we go to full up travel, so right there, this little angle right here in this aluminum rod is actually helpful because it's allowing us a little bit of clearance. So I think to keep this hardware set up, we have to go with a longer servo arm and have that exposed. I think is pretty much our only option to make this work. We're going to move on with that and give it some thought, move on to the gear. So we're moving on to the gear. I reinstalled the left landing gear here in the wing. Now the point of doing this is, number one, it's reinstalled, but number two, we need to work on our door servo. Now our door servo is a pretty cool setup. It's simply just going to tuck underneath. Anyways, it does fit underneath there, and we could add some mounting brackets to it. The gear's in the way right now. So, but basically our door linkage setup here, it's going to be straight when the door is closed, and the servo is going to operate like this when it's open. So when it's closed, it's going to be mechanically locked. When it's open, the servo is going to be holding it open. Now these doors, the way they're going to work, they're going to open, gear's going to come down, then they're going to close. When the gear goes up, the doors are going to open, gear comes up, doors close. So these doors will never be open for very long extended periods of time. So I'm going to pull our gear sequencer out, and we need to get these servos kind of organized and set up before we install them and work on our linkages. Okay, so one thing we're going to do right now is we're going to get our receiver and gyro and everything set up here so we can work on our gear more easily. Now I'll explain exactly what I mean with that. So if you look at our channel layout, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 are all of our normal controllable outputs that we want the gyro on. So those outputs are all going to be on the Cortex, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we've got the Cortex here, and then we've got our throttle, flap, gear, brake, air brake. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 other channels from 7 to 12. So the reason I want to get the Cortex programmed into the system right now is so that we can plug our servos into channels or ports 1 to 6, and then we can reassign these channels right here, or ports, output ports. So 1 will be channel 7 for throttle, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So then we'll be able to plug our gear channel into this guy, and we'll have all of our channels already laid out. So what we need to do that is we're going to go into our Rec 7. So we've powered up the Rec 7, and we're going to go into the actual Rec 7 itself. I'm just holding you guys off at an angle here so you don't see the reflection. So we go model, Device Explorer, Rex 7. So what we need to do here is we are going to go into, we'll just check everything over right now. So go General Settings, we'll change that to 11. Alarm voltage, we'll go 6.8. And then we are going to go into alternative pin configuration. And this is kind of one of the things we need to do here. So we've got our E2 port, which is set up for servo, and E1 is set up for servo. Now we want to keep E1 for now set up as servo, so we've got access to everything. But E2, we want to go to EX bus. So this is now going to become an output, and that is going to get plugged into the Cortex. So we're going to run a wire from E2 into our B port on the Cortex. Okay, so now we will plug our Cortex into E2. And the Cortex itself is basically not ready to use right now, so we got to program the Cortex. So we're just going to take a test servo here and we'll plug it into one of the numbered ports, so channel 1, and it's got power. Then we're going to take our bind plug, we're going to put it in the programming port. Now this is different than using the Cortex with a central box. It's important that you do this as per the manual's instructions. Okay, so now the Cortex knows that it is operating what it's supposed to be operating. So right now it's port number 1 is an aileron function. So we're going to unpower this now. And we're going to power it back up, and it should go into programming mode. And we're going to program our stick movements here. Programming mode, so right aileron, left aileron, forward elevator, back elevator, right rudder, left rudder, and gyro off. Okay, so our gyro off function didn't work, so we're going to unpower this. And we need to confirm that our gyro function is working in the radio. All right, and good lesson here. So when I reprogrammed all of my ports, I didn't assign a gyro port. So the gyro port can be any channel from 16 down. So we'll just go and make channel, just so we have a couple extra ones here, we'll make channel 15 our gyro sense. So there doesn't need to be any outputs anywhere on the actual system, but we have a port in the radio or a function in the radio, function 15, which is gyro sense. So now we'll go through that same programming steps and try this again. Okay, so we got our bind plug in our Cortex. We're going to power things up again. And once again, it's going to go into its programming mode. Double bump, right aileron, left aileron, forward elevator, back elevator, right rudder, left rudder, and gyro off. Perfect. So now it is programmed to our radio. So we're going to power that, or pull the bind plug, power this guy off, power cycle it again, and it should go through its normal startup here. Perfect. So red means it's off. So if we move the gyro around, our servo is not doing anything. Turn the gyro on, our servo is going to do lots of funky stuff. So now with that done, what we can do is we can now go back into our, Rec 7. So now our Cortex is showing up there. So let's go in there. We'll just adjust things a little bit here. So we're not running analog servos, we're running digitals. Direction, we won't worry about it right now. Single RX, which is fine. So that's done. Go back into our Rec 7 and we will go to receiver outputs. So receiver outputs, so output pin number 1, so port 1 on the Rec 7 is now going to become our throttle channel. Output pin number 2 is going to be function 8, 3, function 9, 4 is gear, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, 41, 42, 43, 44, 45, 46, 47, 48, 49, 50, 51, 52, 53, 54, 55, 56, 57, 58, 59, 60, 61, 62, 63, 64, 65, 66, 67, 68, 69, 70, 71, 72, 73, 74, 75, 76, 77, 78, 79, 80, 81, 82, 83, 84, 85, 86, 87, 88, 89, 90, 91, 92, 93, 94, 95, 96, 97, 98, 99, 100, 101, 102, 103, 104, 105, 106, 107, 108, 109, 110, 111, 112, 113, 114, 115, 116, 117, 118, 119, 120, 121, 122, 123 is brake, and 6 is air brake. So now we've got all those channels assigned to here. So now what we can do is we can plug our gear channel into output pin number 4 on the Rex, and that operates as channel 10 from the radio. So we've got our Zykoy controller powered, we've got it plugged into port number 4 on our Rex 7, and we can see here by our little display, gear is in the down position. If I operate the gear, it's saying retract, and it will go into the retract mode or up mode. So haven't done any programming with this, but now we can start to work on our gear and door sequencing. Okay, so played around with the sequencer on the Zykoy unit, and unfortunately we've only got open and close options. So basically we have to run these guys through the sequencer in the radio. There's no setting in the sequencer on the basic controller here where you can have the doors open, gear comes down, and doors close. So what we're going to do is we are going to set up some alternative functions for door servos. So I'll show you guys exactly what we are talking about here with this. So this is going to get into a little bit of the technical side of things, but when we do an aircraft setup for this owner or even myself, we set up a primary receiver in normal and our secondary receiver is in clone. So we're using the default setting in the radio. Now, what we can do is you still have all the opportunity to use all of those functions if you're using dual path with Jetty, but when you switch the receiver to a clone receiver, you can still have all those outputs. So what does that mean? I'll show you. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into the radio and we're going to set up a door function. So we're going to have like channel 13 is going to be our door function. So that channel 13 is going to be set up on 3 output channels. So for example, we will set our function of doors and we'll set it up on the clone receiver or our secondary receiver on channels or port number 1, 2, and 3. So that'll be nose, left, and right wings. Then when we switch this to a clone receiver, those outputs will still be valid and they'll still operate like normal. So that is one of the little tricks when you're setting up a clone in this type of setup. So I kind of knew we were going to do that. I just wanted to check and make sure that we weren't eliminating the function on the gear controller if it was possible to use this, and it's not. So we're going to eliminate using the gear controller for the doors and use our Jetty system. Okay, so we've kind of got things set up here, so we're going to modify things a little bit. So we're only using on our primary receiver channels 1 through 5 because we've got number 1, E1 is going to be an EX bus input from the secondary receiver or what is going to be the clone. E2 is our EX bus output to the Cortex. So now what we need to do is we need to go in and take number 6, which was air brake, and we need to move that over to our other receiver. So let's go in and take care of this. So output number 6. That stuff doesn't really matter right now because those aren't functional for outputs. And then we'll go into our second receiver, which is our Rex 7 underneath there. And we'll go into receiver outputs. And so output pin number 1 is going to be, so in the other receiver we've got throttle, flap, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then we've got air brake, which is going to be in the second receiver. So channel 1 or port number 1 is air brake. Output pin number 2 is going to be door. Output pin number 3 is door 14. Output pin number 4 is door 15. There we go. Output pin number 5 is nothing, but we've got to leave it as rudder. So now this may be awfully confusing to some, but basically we've got channels 1 through 6 coming through the Cortex. We've got 1 through 5, these 5 output ports. go to our overhead view here. So aileron, aileron, elevator, elevator, rudder, rudder. Those first 6 are going through the cortex. The next 5, so throttle, flap, flap, gear, brake, are through the first receiver. Then we've got air brake, doors, doors, doors. So those 1, 2, 3, 4 are through the second receiver. So we've got port number 5 on the second receiver right there, which is open, nothing's on it. Those 2 E ports are going to be tied into the system, and that is our channel layout for this aircraft. Now that may be confusing. If you're a Jetty user, you probably have a better idea with that, but basically this radio can have 24 functions. Some would call it channels, but 24 functions on the radio, and doesn't matter what equipment you have set up, they're all programmable, so they can be whatever you want it to be, which is exactly what we're doing in this scenario. Okay, so we will be using the sequencer in the radio to set up the doors, but all I've done now is I've basically tied each of those doors into my gear switch. So if you watch here, so we've got 13, 14, 15. When I operate the gear switch, those are doing what they're supposed to be doing. So they're basically moving these servos. So what we're going to do is we're going to use that gear switch for each of these guys to set up the travel and position and everything for these door servos, and then we'll go in afterwards and create a sequence using the sequencer in the Jetty radio for those 3 channels. All right, so no sequencing done yet, but I'll show you guys what we got so far. We got the door figured out here. So I'm just going to flick the gear down switch, the door is going to open, gear is going to come down. Awesome. So when we get this all sequenced, as the gear is going down, now the doors would close and they would be all completely closed off. So there's a shot of how I got the gear all set up. So basically I had 2 thin plywood plates. They're glued in place. This is all sort of just temporary right now. And then we'll go back in and we will get everything fastened nicely in place. We've got clevis clevis, so nice strong scenario there. And it looks like it's going to work out perfectly. All right, so with our gear door completed, it's time to move on to our flap servo. Now this is insanely tight. So there's not a lot of room here for a servo to begin with, and our leg is just going to clear this area, I believe. And of course, this was all designed around the 8411 servo-ish, so we need to be mindful of the space that we have. So we may have to make small adjustments here with the servo. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to get this servo installed onto the brackets that get screwed down to that plate. So that's step number 1. Essentially, these get mounted the same way we did the other ones. So we're just going to use drill holes, use servo screws, and get those guys fastened down. All right, so it looks like our flap's going to fit in there perfectly, which is awesome. There's just enough room for this servo. Now the stock setup for the flap linkage detail is a 256, well, it's a 256 coupler with 256 Sullivan clevises and 1/16 music wire. We're going with a stronger system for our setup. So we're going to use 440 threaded rod. We're going to use 440 golden Sullivan clevises. I think this should all work. I just kind of did a mock-up here. My biggest concern is the Sullivan clevises. So when you look at the size difference between the 440 and the 256, they're sort of similar in dimensions. The 440 is just bigger, right? So the concern here is there enough room in the opening for the 440? I think there is. So we're going to go with that initially, and hopefully we can make that work, because that's going to be a way stronger setup than using the tiny little 256 rod. All right, so we've got our flap set up here on one of the wings, and everything looks good. So the stock setup for this aircraft is this side, the flap side, is threaded, and you thread your 440 fastener, the 256 fastener into the side of the flap, and that's it. So we're going one step further. So we're using a longer 256, Loctiting a nut on the other side, and then putting some black CA on this side as well to hold everything together with the Loctite, of course. So we've got a whole bunch of extra layers of protection there on the flap, and everything is nice and solid. So that is awesome. The challenge now is matching up the other flap to this one and making a perfect match. So the one thing that works really well with the BVM is the gauge for the flap system. So basically you can get this set up and use the gauge. They tell you exactly where to put it on the plans for landing and takeoff flaps. So pretty easy to set that up. We're just going to get those positions set up, of course, with the gauge. All right, and if you're watching this, tonight we have our next episode of The Lighter Side of RC After Dark. Now what the After Dark is, if you're not familiar with it, it's a completely separate channel. If you search for it, there's some links down below. But The Lighter Side of RC After Dark, basically it's our live stream here from the shop. So this video came out Saturday morning, and our live stream is happening at 7 p.m. Mountain Time. If you want to check it out, it's tons of fun. We do live streams from the shop. You get to communicate with us. So if you have any questions or whatnot, it's totally interactive. You can ask on the live chat, and I can see your questions and respond to them. Tons of fun. We always have a blast. We do it every 2 weeks. So I encourage you to check it out. The Lighter Side of RC After Dark. It's fun. So generally when I'm doing a project like this, or most sports jets, I'll get one wing completely done. We've kind of been flipping back and forth between these two wings, which is totally fine. But at this point, I'm gonna wrap this wing up here, and we're gonna get everything finalized before we do the rest of our steps on that wing. Now this wing, we've got the gear installed, which is fine. The other wing, we're gonna get the gear installed, get the brake line run. This one, we still have to do the flap, so there's kind of stuff back and forth. So next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna get our gear installed. We gotta take our door off the gear because getting this cover plate on, having the door on here, or the flying door, as I know it's been called, is not really awesome. Because you can't get the whole cover on here with the flying door on. So we're gonna get the gear bolted down, and then we're going to get our brake line run. So we've got our lines run to this point here, so that's fine. We're gonna have our brake line come down. All of our connectors are essentially coming right out of that location right there. So if we count these guys, that's gonna be the important part. Now our gear has 3 connectors, but really only 2 are needed, are positive and negative, right? So the gear has 2, the brakes have 2, but we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 9 for our servos, 10, 11, 12, 13. So we have 13 connectors. So what we'll probably do is we're gonna go with a 9-pin and maybe a 6-pin. Well, I'm gonna give that a bit of thought, but anyways, let's get our leg installed, get our brake line run. Okay, so we've got our gear installed, we've got the brake line run. Now the brake line, we have put it in spiral wrap. The spiral wrap goes all the way around to right behind the gear, so right there, and it just tucks nicely behind the gear, so it's out of the way. Now, this is a decent way to run this wire. One of the other ways would be this way. The downside is, with this door installed on here, there's no way to really run it behind the gear. There's lots of space when this gear is extended in this area, and that would be a consideration I would make to run it in this area if we weren't using the door. So then we would just have it come down here and essentially follow the same kind of path. But with this method here, what happens is the gear extends and this just holds it out of the way. I'll show you guys exactly what it looks like here. So we've got the cover plate held in place. Let's extend this. There we go. So our little relief loop in there just pulls out, and the spiral wrap helps to keep everything protected and tight. And then we'll retract this. So right now this is kind of coming straight, and then as we retract it, it's going to tuck back in its little spot. Perfect. And it's back in its little relief loop. So that's going to work good. Happy with that. And that's what we're going to repeat on the other side. So I think with this done, we are now ready to pretty much get our door installed here. All right, so we've got our main hatch on here. We will touch up these screws as well too. We've got a little bit of red paint left over from the painting process, and we'll touch all of our screw heads up with red. So we're going to extend this gear now. We've got our door installed. Those are Loctited in place. So let's extend this. Nice. And bring her back in. Awesome. All right, so we've got our door painted on the leg, the flying door. We've got our wheel door painted. Also, while I was here, I painted the white brake plug-in. So now that disappears as well too. So that is done. This side, this right wing, is complete with the exception of doing our connectors for the wing and also just touching up our little red screws on the wing. And that wraps up video number 2 in the assembly process of the BVM Super Bandit Crazy Red Edition. This is going very well. I'm glad we've made some good progress on the wings. We're going to continue on and finish up the other wing, and from there we're probably going to start working on our back end and moving forward. It's going to get a little bit scattered as we move into video number 3. We're going to get into like painting the bypass and just kind of jumping all over the place. But this is a fun project, and hopefully you guys are getting something from this. So last thing I'll touch on is channel membership. If you're interested in seeing the videos early, generally I'm releasing videos a couple days, a week, sometimes 2 weeks on the channel. And our channel members, thank you to channel members that are currently channel members on the channel. They get to see those videos when they're uploaded to YouTube. So for example, this video is coming out Thursday evening and channel members get to see it right away. Everybody else that's seeing this, you guys are seeing it on Saturday or at some point in the future. So if you're interested in channel membership, it is a paid service. Check it out down below. Thanks guys for watching. If you have any questions or comments, list them down below. You can also reach out to me at thelightersideofrc@gmail.com. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.